There is a house you have never seen, yet you have lived in it all your life. Its rooms are filled with furniture you did not choose. Its walls bear marks from hands you have never touched. In its basement, there are locked doors, doors you walk past every day without noticing, without questioning, without remembering that you, yourself, turned the key and walked away. This house is you, and the past does not live behind you, trailing like a shadow in yesterday's sunlight. No, the past lives inside you, in the architecture of your neurons, in the chemistry of your blood, in the silent language your body speaks when your mind believes it has forgotten. The past is not a place you left. It is the ground you stand on. It is the air in your lungs. It is the lens through which you see everything you believe is new. Tonight, we descend into that house. We walk toward those locked basement doors, and we ask a question that will unravel everything you thought you knew about who you are. What if you are not living your life, but reliving it? What if every choice you make, every person you love, every fear that grips you in the hollow hours before dawn? What if all of it is an echo, a repetition, a song composed long before you were born, now playing through you like a melody searching for resolution? You see, modern science has discovered something the ancients knew in their bones. The past does not die. It transmutes. It descends into the hidden places, into the unconscious mind, into the body's cellular memory, into the very structure of your DNA. Trauma, loss, love, terror, these experiences do not simply fade with time. They embed themselves. They become the invisible scaffolding of your personality, the unconscious script of your relationships, the gravitational force pulling you toward the same patterns again and again and again. This is not mysticism. This is biology. This is neuroscience. This is psychology meeting poetry in the dark chapel of the human soul. Consider this. Right now, as you listen to these words, there are memories stored in your brain that you cannot consciously access. Memories from before you learned to speak, memories your explicit mind has completely forgotten, yet which continue to shape your emotional responses, your attractions, your aversions, your midnight anxieties. Your hippocampus archived them. Your amygdala flagged them as significant. And now they live in the shadows, pulling strings you cannot see. But it goes deeper still. In the 1990s, researchers studying Holocaust survivors discovered something extraordinary and terrifying. The children of survivors, people who had never experienced the camps themselves, carried biological markers of their parents' trauma. The stress hormones were different. The genetic expression was altered. Somehow, the horror of Auschwitz had traveled through time, through flesh, through the mysterious mechanisms of epigenetics, and had taken up residence in the bodies of the next generation. The past, it seemed, was not contained by the boundaries of individual lifetimes. It was transgenerational. It was alive. This discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community, but it would not have surprised our ancestors. The ancient Greeks spoke of the Moirai, the fates who spun the thread of destiny, weaving the patterns of one generation into the next. The Buddhists understood karma not merely as moral consequence, but as the momentum of unresolved action carrying forward through time. The indigenous cultures of every continent held rituals to honor and heal the wounds of their ancestors, knowing intuitively that the dead are not gone. They are woven into the living. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a psychic inheritance deeper than personal memory, a repository of archetypes and primal patterns shared by all humanity. He believed we carry within us not just our own past, but the past of our species, the ancient fears that kept us alive in the savannah, the mythic narratives that gave meaning to suffering, the shadow figures that represent everything we have exiled from consciousness. And Sigmund Freud, standing at the dawn of psychoanalysis, peering into the dreams and slips of the tongue of his patients, understood that the unconscious mind is a museum of the unresolved past. Every neurosis, he claimed, is a monument to a forgotten moment, a childhood wound, a repressed desire, a terror too overwhelming to face consciously. The past does not vanish into memory. It disguises itself as the present. But here is what we must understand. Here at the threshold of our descent, the past living inside you is not your enemy. It is not a curse. It is a message. Encrypted, yes, buried, yes, sometimes erupting in symptoms that terrify and confuse, but a message nonetheless. A message from the depths of your own being, from the generations that came before you, from the unlived life demanding to be seen. The question is, will you listen? Will you have the courage to descend into the basement of yourself, to turn the handle of those locked doors, to face what waits in the darkness with open eyes and a willing heart? Because transformation, true transformation, does not come from transcending the past. It comes from integrating it, from bringing what was hidden into the light, from understanding that the shadow is not separate from you. It is you, the you that you abandoned, the you that you exiled, the you that has been waiting all this time to be welcomed home. This is the journey of Season 3, the descent into shadow, the archaeology of the self. This is not about blame or victimhood or becoming trapped in old stories. This is about liberation through understanding. This is about discovering that the key to your future has always been hidden in your past. Not the past you remember, but the past you have forgotten, the past you have inherited, the past that lives inside you like a second heartbeat. Tonight, we will trace the origins of this mystery through the corridors of neuroscience and the caves of ancient wisdom. We will witness the moment when memory becomes biology, when history becomes destiny, when the personal dissolves into the ancestral. We will explore how trauma embeds itself not just in the mind, but in the very fabric of the body, how it alters gene expression, how it rewires neural pathways, how it creates unconscious patterns that feel like fate, but are actually just unmetabolized experience. And then, if we have the courage, we will ask the most dangerous question of all. How do we break the pattern? How do we liberate ourselves from a past we did not choose? How do we become the author of our own story when the pen has been held by ghosts? The answers are not simple, they are not quick, but they are profound, and they will change everything. So take a breath. We are about to descend into memory, into shadow, into the house you have lived in all your life, but have never truly seen. The past is not behind you, it is inside you, and it is time at last to face it. Let us begin at the beginning, or rather, at the place where all beginnings are stored, the human brain, that 3-pound universe of electrical storms and chemical symphonies, folded in on itself like a letter from God, written in a language we are only beginning to decode. In 1953, a man named Henry Molaison, known in the scientific literature simply as HM, underwent experimental brain surgery to treat his severe epilepsy. The surgeons removed large portions of his hippocampus, the seahorse-shaped structure deep in the temporal lobes. The seizures stopped, but so did something else, HM's ability to form new long-term memories. After the surgery, HM lived in a perpetual present. Every conversation was new to him. Every person he met for the first time, over and over again. He could remember his childhood with remarkable clarity. The years before the surgery remained intact, but the moment-to-moment flow of new experience would not stick. It evaporated like morning mist. Yet here is what was strange, what confounded the researchers. HM could still learn. If you taught him a new motor skill, like drawing while looking at his hand in a mirror, he would improve over days and weeks. He would insist he had never done the task before, yet his hand would know. His body would remember what his mind could not. This discovery revolutionized neuroscience. It revealed that memory is not a single thing, but a constellation of systems. There is explicit memory, the conscious recall of facts and events, dependent on the hippocampus. And there is implicit memory, the unconscious retention of skills, emotions, and associations, etched into different brain structures, the basal ganglia, the amygdala, the cerebellum. What this means is profound. You can forget something consciously while still remembering it unconsciously. The past can live inside you without your awareness, shaping your behavior, your emotional responses, your very sense of self, while you remain convinced you have moved on. This is how the past becomes a ghost. This is how history becomes haunting. Let us travel further back, to the birth of depth psychology, to Vienna in the late 19th century, where a young neurologist named Sigmund Freud was listening to women speak about paralyses that had no physical cause, about blindness that vanished under hypnosis, about symptoms that seemed to obey psychological rather than anatomical laws. These women were called hysterics. Their suffering was dismissed as female weakness, as theatrics, as moral failing. But Freud, sitting in his consulting room, smoking his cigars, listening with an attention that bordered on the obsessive, Freud heard something else. He heard the voice of the past speaking through the symptom. He heard memory disguised as pain. One patient, whom he called Anna O., suffered from a bewildering array of symptoms: paralysis of her limbs, hallucinations, loss of speech. Through hypnosis and what she called the talking cure, Freud and his colleague Joseph Breuer traced each symptom back to a specific traumatic moment, usually connected to her father's illness and death. When the forgotten memory was brought to consciousness, when it was spoken aloud and emotionally experienced, the symptom would vanish. It seemed like magic. But it was not magic. It was the discovery that unprocessed emotional experience does not disappear. It descends. It falls below the threshold of consciousness into what Freud called the unconscious mind, a vast inner realm where forbidden desires, traumatic memories, and unacceptable impulses are stored, repressed, denied, but never truly forgotten. Freud proposed that the mind is structured like an iceberg. The conscious mind is merely the tip visible above water, while the vast bulk, the unconscious, remains hidden beneath the surface, containing the true drivers of behavior. And here, in this underwater realm, the past is always present. Time does not exist in the unconscious. A trauma from childhood remains as vivid and emotionally charged at 60 as it was at 6. This is the paradox of psychological time. Consciously, we move forward through the years, aging and changing. But unconsciously, we remain suspended in the unresolved moments of our past, replaying them in disguise, seeking, always seeking, to finally master what once overwhelmed us. Freud called this repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate traumatic situations in the hope of achieving a different outcome. The woman who was abandoned by her father unconsciously chooses unavailable men. The man who was shamed by his mother finds himself in relationships where he is chronically criticized. The past does not repeat because we are doomed. It repeats because we are trying to heal. But without consciousness, without awareness, the repetition only deepens the wound. Then came Carl Jung, Freud's brilliant protégé, who would eventually break from his mentor to forge his own path into the depths. Jung agreed that the unconscious mind was real and powerful, but he believed Freud had not gone deep enough. Beyond the personal unconscious, the repository of our individual forgotten memories, Jung proposed the existence of the collective unconscious, a deeper stratum of the psyche that contains the psychological inheritance of all humanity. This collective unconscious, Jung argued, is populated by archetypes, universal patterns of experience that transcend culture and history: the hero, the mother, the shadow, the wise old man. These are not learned but inherited, etched into the structure of the psyche through millions of years of human and pre-human experience. They are the forms through which experience becomes myth, through which personal suffering connects to universal meaning. Jung observed that his patients' dreams and visions often contained symbols they could not possibly have learned, images from alchemy, from Gnostic texts, from African tribal rituals. Somehow, the psyche had access to knowledge that transcended individual biography. Somehow, the past of the entire species lived within each person. This was not metaphor for Jung. He believed, and modern neuroscience increasingly supports, that the brain's fundamental structures, shaped by evolution, contain the accumulated wisdom and terror of our ancestors. The fear of snakes that appears in people who have never encountered a snake. The archetype of the Great Mother that appears in every culture's mythology. The structure of narrative itself, which follows predictable patterns across all human storytelling, these are inheritances from the deep past. But Jung's greatest insight was about the shadow, that part of ourselves we reject, repress, and project onto others. The shadow contains everything we believe ourselves not to be: our aggression, our selfishness, our sexual desires, our weakness, our power. It is formed in childhood as we learn what is acceptable and what must be hidden in order to be loved. And once formed, the shadow does not disappear. It lives inside us, influencing us from the darkness, erupting in slips of the tongue, in sudden rages, in inexplicable attractions and aversions. The shadow is the past, our personal past, our family's past, our culture's past, living inside us in exile, waiting to be acknowledged. And until it is acknowledged, until it is integrated, we cannot be whole. We remain fragmented, at war with ourselves, projecting our disowned parts onto the world, and then battling them there. Now let us make a leap, from the psychological to the biological, from the 20th century to the 21st, from the consulting room to the laboratory. In the early 2000s, a researcher named Rachel Yehuda began studying the children of Holocaust survivors. She wanted to know if trauma could be inherited, not just psychologically, through family dynamics and narrative, but biologically, through some mechanism that had yet to be discovered. What she found was astonishing. The children of Holocaust survivors had altered levels of cortisol, the stress hormone. They had different patterns of gene expression. Specifically, genes related to stress response were methylated differently than in control groups. Somehow, the extreme trauma experienced by the parents had left biological marks that were passed to the next generation. This was the birth of behavioral epigenetics, the study of how experiences can change gene expression without changing the DNA sequence itself. The genes themselves were not mutated, but the tags attached to them, the chemical markers that determine whether a gene is active or silenced, had been altered by trauma, and these alterations could be inherited. Think about what this means. Your grandmother's fear, your grandfather's loss, your great-great-great-grandmother's grief during famine. These experiences may have literally altered the expression of your genes. The past is not just psychologically present. It is biochemically present. It is written into your cells. Other studies followed. Researchers discovered that the descendants of enslaved people carried markers of intergenerational trauma. The children of famine survivors showed altered metabolism. The grandchildren of war veterans displayed heightened stress responses to triggers they had never personally experienced. The mechanism, scientists believe, involves the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system that regulates stress response. When someone experiences severe trauma, their HPA axis adapts, becoming either hyperactive or hypoactive, priming the body for survival in a dangerous world. These adaptations can then be passed through epigenetic markers to offspring, preparing them for a world their parents knew, even if that world no longer exists. This is evolution operating on a timescale of generations rather than millennia. This is the body's attempt to help us survive by encoding the lessons of the past. But when the past is traumatic, when the adaptations are maladaptive in the present, this biological inheritance becomes a burden, a biological echo of suffering that persists long after the original danger has passed. And there is more. Memory itself, the very substrate of the past, is not stored in some static archive like files in a cabinet. Modern neuroscience has discovered that every time you remember something, you are recreating it. You are pulling it from storage, reassembling it in consciousness, and then storing it again. And in that process, the memory can change. It can be updated, contaminated, merged with other memories, reshaped by your current emotional state. This is called memory reconsolidation, and it explains why eyewitness testimony is so unreliable, why siblings remember the same childhood differently, why your most vivid memories may be partly fiction. The past, even as you remember it, is not a fixed thing. It is alive. It evolves. It interacts with the present. So here we arrive at a staggering conclusion. The past lives inside you in at least 4 distinct ways. First, through explicit memory, the conscious recall of events, facts, people, stored in the hippocampus and cortex, subject to forgetting and distortion, but accessible to awareness. Second, through implicit memory, the unconscious retention of emotional associations, procedural knowledge, and traumatic imprints stored in subcortical structures, shaping your responses without your knowledge. Third, through psychological structures, the unconscious mind as Freud understood it, the shadow as Jung described it, the internalized voices of parents and culture, the unfinished business of childhood now operating as invisible scripts. And fourth, through epigenetic inheritance, the biological marks left by your ancestors' experiences, altering your gene expression, priming your nervous system for threats and opportunities that may be generations old. The past is not one thing living inside you. It is a multitude, a chorus, a civilization of ghosts, some whispering, some shouting, some silent, but shaping the very ground you stand on. And here is the question that must haunt us as we prepare to descend deeper. If the past lives inside us in ways we cannot see, cannot consciously access, cannot easily change, then how much of what we call I is actually we? How much of your personality is your own, and how much is inherited script? How much of your suffering is yours, and how much belongs to those who came before? The ancients understood this intuitively. They performed rituals for the ancestors. They honored the dead. They believed that unfinished business from previous generations could haunt the living until it was resolved. We modernity dismissed this as superstition until science discovered it was, in a sense, true. The past does not stay in the past. It travels, through memory, through trauma, through the body, through the bloodline. It lives inside you. And now, we must ask, what happens when the past is not integrated? What happens when the shadow remains in exile? What happens when inherited trauma is not metabolized? When implicit memories are not brought to consciousness? When the unconscious scripts continue to run without awareness? What happens is suffering, repetition, stuckness, the feeling that you are living someone else's life, making choices that feel inevitable yet alien, trapped in patterns you can see but cannot escape. This is the crisis we now face. This is the conflict at the heart of the human condition. And this is where our descent turns dark. We must go deeper now. We must enter the basement of the psyche, where the past lives in its most raw and unprocessed form. We must witness what happens when memory becomes symptom, when history becomes fate, when the ghosts take over. We must enter the shadow. Picture a woman. Let us call her Elena. She is 35 years old, successful by conventional measures, a career, a home, friends. But there is something wrong, something she cannot name. In her relationships, a pattern repeats. She falls in love intensely, gives everything, and then, at the moment of deepest intimacy, she sabotages. She picks a fight. She withdraws. She finds some flaw in her partner that suddenly becomes intolerable. And the relationship ends, leaving her devastated, convinced that she is unlovable, that there is something fundamentally broken inside her. This has happened 5 times now. The faces change, but the story remains the same. Elena tells herself she just has bad luck, that she keeps choosing the wrong people. But in the hollow hours of the night, a terrible suspicion grows. What if I am the problem? What if I am unconsciously destroying what I most desire? Elena does not know, cannot know without help, that this pattern was set in motion 40 years before she was born. Her grandmother, a woman she never met, was abandoned by her husband during pregnancy, left to raise her child, Elena's mother, alone in poverty and shame. The trauma was unbearable. The grandmother hardened, became emotionally unavailable, treated love as weakness. She raised her daughter with the unspoken message, do not trust, do not depend, do not need. Elena's mother, carrying this wound, unconsciously passed it forward. She married a man who was physically present but emotionally absent. She loved her daughter but could not show it in ways Elena could receive. And young Elena, with the exquisite sensitivity of a child, absorbed the message beneath the words. Love equals abandonment. Intimacy equals danger. If you get too close, they will leave. This was not taught explicitly. It was transmitted through 1,000 micro-interactions, through the mother's tension when Elena reached for comfort, through the withdrawal when Elena expressed need. It was encoded implicitly, stored in the emotional memory systems before language, before conscious thought. It became part of Elena's operating system, a subroutine that runs automatically, outside awareness. Now, as an adult, whenever Elena approaches genuine intimacy, her amygdala, the brain's threat detector, sounds an alarm. Danger. This is the moment you get hurt. This is the moment they leave. And her unconscious, trying to protect her, engineers the abandonment first. Better to be the one who leaves than the one left behind. Better to confirm the belief than to risk its falsification. This is what trauma does. This is how the past lives inside us, not as memory that we can reflect on, but as patterned response that feels like self. Elena's sabotage does not feel like repetition of an old wound. It feels like reasonable reaction to her partner's flaws. It feels like wisdom. It feels like who she is. And so the past perpetuates itself, generation after generation, wound after wound, until someone, if they are lucky, if they are brave, says, "Stop. I will not pass this forward. I will turn and face the shadow. I will integrate what has been split off. I will heal." But that moment of turning requires something that is in short supply: consciousness, awareness, the capacity to see what has been invisible. And that is terrifyingly difficult, because the unconscious operates precisely by remaining unconscious. That is its nature. That is its protective function. Consider the work of Bessel van der Kolk, a psychiatrist who has spent decades studying trauma. In his research with combat veterans, abuse survivors, and people with PTSD, van der Kolk discovered something crucial. Traumatic memories are stored differently than ordinary memories. They are not integrated into the narrative stream of experience. Instead, they exist as fragments, sensory impressions, emotional states, somatic sensations, disconnected from the story of the self. This is why trauma survivors often cannot just get over it. The trauma is not remembered in the way normal events are remembered. It is re-experienced. A sound, a smell, a certain quality of light. These can trigger a flashback, a body memory, in which the past becomes the present. Time collapses. The trauma happens again, now in full sensory detail, with the same terror, the same helplessness. Van der Kolk showed that in these moments, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thought, for locating events in time, for self-reflection, goes offline. Meanwhile, the amygdala and other limbic structures light up like fireworks. The thinking brain shuts down. The survival brain takes over. You are not remembering the trauma, you are in it. This is the past living inside you at its most raw and overwhelming. This is implicit memory unleashed. And because the traumatic memory is not properly encoded as past, because it lacks the timestamp, the narrative container, the mind cannot distinguish between remembering and reoccurring. The past is not past. It is here. It is now. It is happening. Now scale this up. Imagine not just one trauma, but multiple traumas. Imagine complex developmental trauma, the kind that occurs not in a single shocking event, but in the grinding daily failures of care that a child experiences when their caregivers are themselves traumatized, absent, abusive, or addicted. This is what Freud encountered in his patients. This is what fills the consulting rooms of therapists worldwide. Complex trauma does not just create flashbacks. It shapes personality itself. It becomes the lens through which all experience is filtered. Children who grow up in unpredictable, dangerous, or emotionally barren environments develop what psychologists call insecure attachment, the inability to trust that others will be there, that the world is safe, that the self is worthy of love. These children become adults who struggle with intimacy, with emotional regulation, with a core sense of emptiness or wrongness. And here is the cruelest part. They often do not know why. The trauma occurred before they had the cognitive capacity to encode it as narrative memory. It exists as implicit knowledge, as body knowledge. They just feel broken. They just know something is wrong. But when they search their conscious memory, they find nothing, or they find events that seem, on the surface, not bad enough to warrant such suffering. This is the gap between what is known consciously and what is known unconsciously. This is the gap where the past lives, unacknowledged and therefore unintegrated, continuing to shape everything from the shadows. Gabor Mate, a physician who has worked extensively with addiction and trauma, often asks, "Why the pain?" Not, "What's wrong with you?" He understands that symptoms, whether addiction, chronic illness, or psychological distress, are not flaws in the person, but adaptive responses to impossible situations. The child who dissociates during abuse is not weak. They are surviving the only way they can. The adult who drinks to numb emotional pain is not lacking willpower. They are self-medicating unresolved trauma. The past lives inside us as pain, and when that pain is not acknowledged, not processed, not metabolized, it becomes symptom. It becomes the repetitive behaviors we cannot stop, the relationships we cannot fix, the feelings we cannot name. But let us go deeper still, into territory that modern science is only beginning to map, the intergenerational transmission of trauma through the family system. Family systems theory, developed by Murray Bowen and others, proposes that families operate as emotional units with patterns that repeat across generations. What one generation does not resolve becomes the next generation's burden. Secrets, shame, abuse, addiction, these do not stay contained in one lifetime. They ripple forward, creating patterns of dysfunction that feel like fate. Mark Wallin, in his work on inherited family trauma, describes how children unconsciously absorb the unfinished emotional business of their parents and grandparents. A father who cannot grieve his own father's death may have a son who struggles with depression. A mother who was sexually abused but never spoke of it may have a daughter who develops chronic pelvic pain with no physical cause. The body, it seems, remembers what the mind has forbidden. This is the shadow at the family level, the unspoken, the denied, the exiled. And until it is brought to light, it will continue to haunt the descendants. Jung said that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. What the parents do not face, the children will be forced to confront. The sins of the fathers are visited upon the children, not as divine punishment, but as psychological and biological inheritance. Consider the research on epigenetics we discussed earlier. Those Holocaust survivors' children did not just inherit altered cortisol levels. They inherited a readiness for trauma, a nervous system primed to expect catastrophe. Imagine growing up with that biology, anxious without knowing why, hypervigilant without conscious threat, unable to relax because your cells are waiting for the next pogrom, the next cattle car, even though you live in suburban safety. This is how the past of others becomes our present. This is how we live lives that are not entirely our own, and it extends beyond the family. Collective trauma, the trauma of slavery, of genocide, of colonization, of war, leaves marks not just on individuals, but on entire communities. The African American community still lives with the legacy of slavery and systemic racism, not just as memory or narrative, but as measurable health disparities, higher rates of hypertension and inflammation, epigenetic changes that persist across generations. The past is not past, it is physiology. Indigenous communities worldwide carry the trauma of cultural annihilation, the attempted genocide of Native Americans, the stolen generations of Aboriginal Australians, the residential schools designed to kill the Indian, save the man. These atrocities live on in rates of addiction, suicide, and chronic disease that no amount of willpower or positive thinking can overcome. The past is in the body. The past is in the community. The past is alive. This is the descent into shadow at its most overwhelming. The recognition that we are not autonomous individuals freely choosing our paths, but nodes in a vast network of inherited pain, biological memory, and collective trauma. We are haunted by ghosts we never met, shaped by events we did not experience, living out patterns we did not consciously choose. And yet, and here we encounter the paradox, this recognition is not the end. It is the beginning. Because only by descending into the shadow, only by facing the full weight of the past living inside us, can we begin the work of integration. Only by making the unconscious conscious can we break the pattern. But how? How do we access what is hidden? How do we remember what is stored implicitly, epigenetically, in the body's tissues and the psyche's depths? How do we bring to light what has been deliberately buried for generations? This is the crisis of the descent. We know the past lives inside us. We can feel its weight, but we cannot always see it. We cannot easily reach it. And even when we glimpse it, in dreams, in symptoms, in the repetitive patterns of our lives, we often flee. Because to face the shadow is to face everything we have spent a lifetime avoiding. Our pain, our rage, our shame, our weakness, our complicity. The defense mechanisms of the psyche are powerful. Repression, denial, dissociation, projection. These are not character flaws. They are survival strategies. They kept us alive when the truth was too much to bear. But what protected us in the past now imprisons us in the present. The walls that kept danger out now keep our own vitality locked in. And so we arrive at the darkest moment of the descent, the moment when the defenses begin to crack, when the repressed material starts to surface, when the ghosts demand to be seen. This is the psychological crisis that often precedes transformation, the breakdown, the dark night of the soul, the moment when the old structures of self can no longer hold and something new threatens to emerge. Jung called this enantiodromia, the conversion into the opposite, the moment when everything you have been collapses and reveals its hidden reverse. The strong person discovers their vulnerability. The kind person confronts their rage. The successful person faces their worthlessness. The past erupts into the present with devastating force. This is terrifying. Many people reaching this moment turn back. They restabilize the defenses. They recommit to the old patterns. They choose the familiar misery over the unknown possibility of transformation. And no one can blame them, because the descent is genuinely dangerous. Without guidance, without support, without a container strong enough to hold the emerging material, the encounter with the shadow can lead to fragmentation rather than integration. But if you stay, if you have the courage to remain in the fire, to witness the shadow without being consumed by it, to face the past not as victim but as witness, then something miraculous becomes possible. The very wound that has imprisoned you can become the doorway to your liberation. This is the promise hidden in the heart of the crisis. This is the secret wisdom of the descent. The past living inside you is not your doom. It is your teacher. It contains, encoded in pain, the map of your healing. Every symptom is a message. Every repetitive pattern is an attempt to master an old wound. Every shadow element, once integrated, becomes a gift. But we cannot access these gifts while we remain in denial. We cannot transform what we refuse to see, and we cannot see what we do not first descend to meet. So we stand now at the nadir of the journey, in the basement of the psyche, surrounded by locked doors, hearing the whispers and cries of everything we have exiled, everything we have forgotten, everything we have inherited without consent. The past is here, all of it, personal and collective, conscious and unconscious, genetic and cultural. And the question echoes in the darkness. What now? Having descended, having witnessed, having felt the full weight of inheritance and trauma and shadow, how do we return? How do we ascend without simply repressing again? How do we integrate this material without being destroyed by it? The answer requires a new kind of consciousness, a new technology of transformation, a synthesis of ancient wisdom and modern science, of psychological insight and somatic practice, of individual work and collective healing. This is the awakening we now turn toward. This is the revelation that awaits us if we do not turn away. The past lives inside you. You cannot change that, but you can change your relationship to it. You can bring light to the shadow. You can metabolize the trauma. You can become not the victim of the past, but its transformer. This is the work of Actor Third. This is the hero's return. This is the integration. Let us ascend. There is a moment in the depths of the descent when everything shifts. It is not a moment you can force or predict. It is not the result of willpower or positive affirmations or spiritual bypassing. It is more subtle, more profound. It is the moment when you stop fighting the past and start listening to it. The moment when the shadow ceases to be enemy and becomes ally. The moment when you realize that integration, not transcendence, is the path to freedom. This is the awakening. And it begins with a paradox. You must become what you have been avoiding. Remember, Elena, our woman trapped in the pattern of abandoning love before it can abandon her? Her awakening began on an ordinary Tuesday in a therapist's office when her therapist asked a question that punctured something. What if your fear of abandonment is not a flaw to be overcome, but a wound to be honored? What if, instead of fighting it, you turned toward it with curiosity? Elena began, slowly, painfully, to explore the origin of her pattern. Through somatic therapy, a body-based approach that accesses implicit memory, she discovered that her body held terror in the chest, a tightness that arose whenever intimacy deepened. This was not a thought. It was a sensation, pre-verbal, primal. It was the infant Elena, reaching for a mother who was too depressed to respond. It was the child Elena, learning that need is dangerous. The therapist guided her to stay with the sensation, to breathe into it, to let it speak. And slowly, the implicit memory began to surface, not as narrative, but as experience. She felt the loneliness of her childhood, the terrifying emptiness of reaching and finding nothing. She wept, deep, body-racking sobs, for the little girl who had learned to stop reaching. And in that weeping, something released. The tension that had lived in her chest for 35 years began to soften. The pattern lost some of its automaticity. It was still there. Patterns do not vanish instantly, but now there was space around it. Now she could see it happening, could feel the impulse to sabotage arising, and could pause, could choose differently. This is the beginning of integration, making the unconscious conscious, bringing what was implicit into explicit awareness, giving language, narrative, and witness to what has lived in the body as mute, unmetabolized experience. But awareness alone is not enough. The neural pathways that encode trauma are not simply deleted by insight. They must be reconsolidated, updated, rewired, integrated into a new narrative that includes both the trauma and the survival, both the wound and the healing. This is where modern neuroscience offers hope. We now know that the brain is neuroplastic, capable of change throughout life. The synapses that fire together wire together. This means that every time Elena chooses differently, every time she stays in the discomfort instead of fleeing, every time she communicates her fear instead of acting it out, she is literally rewiring her brain. She is creating new neural pathways, new automatic responses, new possibilities. But this rewiring requires repetition. It requires practice. A single insight, no matter how profound, is not enough. The old pattern has been reinforced thousands of times. It has momentum. It has neural infrastructure. To create a new pattern requires consistent, deliberate, compassionate repetition, the slow work of neuroplasticity, of laying down new tracks through the wilderness of the psyche. This is the work of therapy, of mindfulness practice, of somatic experiencing, of EMDR and neurofeedback and psychedelic-assisted therapy, all the modern techniques that are now converging around a single insight. The past can be metabolized, trauma can be integrated, the shadow can be brought into consciousness without destroying the ego. Consider the work of Peter Levine, who developed somatic experiencing. Levine observed that animals in the wild, despite experiencing constant threats, do not develop PTSD. A gazelle, after escaping a lion, will literally shake off the excess activation in its nervous system and return to calm. But humans, with our complex brains and social constraints, often cannot complete the defensive response. The fight or flight energy gets trapped in the body, where it creates chronic activation, hypervigilance, and all the symptoms of trauma. Levine's approach involves helping clients access the incomplete survival responses and allowing them to complete, not through cathartic reliving of the trauma, but through gentle, titrated awareness of sensation and impulse. The body wants to finish what it started, to fight back, to flee, to discharge the energy. When it is finally allowed to do so in a safe context, the trauma begins to release its grip. This is shadow work at the somatic level. This is integration through the body. And it works because the past lives in the body, in the tension patterns, in the held breath, in the chronic bracing against threat. You can talk about trauma forever in abstract terms, but until you address the body's reality, until you allow the implicit memory to surface and complete, the past will remain locked in place. Now consider EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, developed by Francine Shapiro. Through bilateral stimulation, usually rapid eye movements, EMDR helps the brain reprocess traumatic memories, moving them from fragmented, emotionally overwhelming states into integrated narrative form. The mechanism is not fully understood, but the results are well documented. Memories that once triggered full-body panic responses become neutralized. They remain as memories, but they lose their traumatic charge. This is the miracle of reconsolidation. The brain can take a memory out of storage, update it with new information, such as "I survived, I am safe now," and return it to storage in a transformed state. The past changes. Not the objective facts, what happened, but the meaning, the emotional charge, the power it holds over the present. And then there are the psychedelics, psilocybin, MDMA, ayahuasca, substances that indigenous cultures have used for millennia for healing, and that Western science is now rediscovering. These compounds work in part by temporarily dissolving the brain's default mode network, the network responsible for the sense of separate self, for narrative continuity, for the habitual patterns of thought. In the dissolution, there is an opportunity to see the self and its story from outside, to access traumatic material without being overwhelmed, to experience a fundamental okayness beneath the layers of conditioning. Many people report after psychedelic therapy that they have encountered their trauma directly but without the usual defenses, and in that encounter, something profound shifts. They see that the trauma is not who they are. They see that their pain, while real, is not the whole truth. They experience a kind of cosmic perspective in which their individual suffering is held within a larger wholeness. This is not spiritual bypassing, not when done properly, with integration and support. This is accessing the collective unconscious, the archetypal realm, the place where personal story dissolves into universal pattern. And from that perspective, healing becomes possible in a way it was not before. But let us not mistake technology for transformation. Pills and protocols can assist, but they cannot replace the fundamental work. The courage to turn toward the shadow, the willingness to feel what you have avoided feeling, the discipline to stay present to discomfort without numbing or fleeing. This is where ancient spiritual practices, meditation, contemplation, ritual, remain invaluable. Mindfulness, at its core, is the practice of present moment awareness without judgment. It is the training of the observing ego, the part of you that can witness your thoughts and feelings without being swept away by them. And this witnessing capacity is essential for shadow work. You must be able to see the pattern without becoming the pattern. You must be able to feel the emotion without drowning in it. Jon Kabat-Zinn brought mindfulness into Western medicine with his mindfulness-based stress reduction program, demonstrating that simply paying attention to the present moment, to sensation, to breath, to the flow of experience, can reduce anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. But why? Because in present moment awareness, the past and future lose their grip. The stories about who you are, about what your trauma means, about how you are doomed to repeat, these dissolve in the simple experience of now. This is not about denying the past. It is about recognizing that the past only has power over you through thought, through story, through identification. When you rest in pure awareness, even for a moment, you discover that you are not your history. You are the consciousness that contains your history. And this consciousness is vast, spacious, fundamentally okay, even when its contents are painful. Jung understood this intuitively. His process of active imagination, a practice in which you dialogue with the figures of your dreams and visions, is a form of meditation, of creating space for the unconscious to speak. By personifying the shadow, by giving it voice and image, you create the possibility of relationship with what has been split off. And in relationship, integration becomes possible. What does this look like in practice? It might look like sitting in meditation and noticing the arising of a familiar feeling, say, the urge to self-sabotage. Instead of acting on it or pushing it away, you turn toward it with curiosity. You ask, what are you? Where do you come from? What do you need? And you listen, not with the intellect, but with full body attention. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the feeling will respond. An image will arise, a memory will surface, a voice will speak. This is the unconscious becoming conscious. This is the shadow stepping into the light. And when you meet it with compassion rather than judgment, with curiosity rather than fear, it begins to transform. The monster becomes the messenger. The demon becomes the guardian. The wound becomes wisdom. But integration is not just individual. Remember, the past that lives inside us is not only personal, it is familial, cultural, collective. And so the healing must also be collective. This is where we encounter the edge of individual psychology and enter the realm of collective transformation. Consider truth and reconciliation processes, like those in South Africa after apartheid or Canada after the residential school atrocities. These are collective shadow work, attempts to bring the historical trauma into consciousness, to bear witness, to acknowledge, to make reparations. They do not erase the past. They do not fix what was broken, but they create a container for the pain to be held, for the truth to be spoken, for the descendants of victims and perpetrators alike to see each other's humanity. This is essential, because collective trauma cannot be healed through individual therapy alone. The black man in America carrying the epigenetic markers of slavery, the Jewish woman carrying the Holocaust in her cells, the indigenous person carrying cultural genocide. Their healing requires not just personal work, but collective acknowledgement, structural change, and reparations. The past must be witnessed not just privately, but publicly. The shadow must be integrated not just individually, but culturally. And this is hard, because it requires those who benefit from historical injustice to face their complicity, their inheritance of advantage built on others' suffering. It requires nations to admit atrocity, institutions to acknowledge harm, dominant cultures to recognize the price of their dominance. This is shadow work at the largest scale, and it is resisted with the same ferocity as individual shadow work, for the same reason. Acknowledging the shadow threatens the ego's self-image as good, as innocent, as righteous. But until the collective shadow is faced, the past will continue to haunt the present. The patterns of oppression will repeat in new forms. The trauma will transmit across generations, and the possibility of genuine healing, personal and collective, will remain foreclosed. So integration, true integration, requires multiple levels. Somatic integration, releasing the trauma held in the body through movement, breath, touch, sensation. Psychological integration, making the unconscious conscious through therapy, dream work, active imagination, bringing what was implicit into explicit awareness. Neural integration, rewiring the pathways through repetition, through new experiences that contradict the old narratives, through neuroplasticity. Narrative integration, constructing a coherent story that includes the trauma, but is not defined by it, that acknowledges the wound, but also honors the resilience, the survival, the growth. Relational integration, healing the patterns in connection with others through relationships that provide the corrective experience the past did not offer. Spiritual integration, locating the personal story within a larger context of meaning, recognizing that suffering, while real, is not the final word, that there is a dimension of experience, call it consciousness, awareness, spirit, that is untouched by trauma. Collective integration, acknowledging historical trauma, making reparations, changing structures that perpetuate harm, creating new narratives that honor all ancestors. This is not simple. This is not quick. But this is the work. This is how the past living inside you transforms from curse to gift. This is how you become not the victim of your history, but its transformer. And here is the revelation, the insight that crystallizes at the peak of the ascent. The purpose of consciousness is integration. This is why we have evolved this extraordinary capacity for self-reflection, for metacognition, for awareness of awareness, so that we can take the raw material of our experience, including our trauma, our shadow, our inheritance, and metabolize it into wisdom, so that we can break the cycle of unconscious repetition and create something new. You are not here to simply survive your past. You are here to transform it. And in transforming your past, you transform the future, for yourself, for your children, for the collective human story. This is the technology of consciousness that the ancients intuited, and that modern science is now confirming. The ability to witness, to integrate, to alchemize, to take lead and make gold, to take wound and make wisdom, to take shadow and make light. But, and this is crucial, integration does not mean perfection. It does not mean the complete eradication of symptoms or patterns. It means a different relationship with them. It means they no longer run you unconsciously. It means you can see them arising and choose how to respond. It means the past becomes part of your story, but not the whole story. Elena, whom we met earlier, still feels the pull of her abandonment wound. But now when it arises, she recognizes it. She can say to her partner, "I'm feeling that old fear. Can you hold me while I move through it?" And in that moment, she is not repeating the past. She is transforming it. She is creating a new experience that contradicts the old narrative. She is teaching her nervous system that intimacy does not always lead to abandonment. She is healing, not by transcending her wound, but by bringing consciousness to it. This is the practical reality of integration, not perfection, but presence, not elimination, but awareness, not transcendence, but embodiment. You do not rise above the past. You bring it with you, acknowledged, integrated, transformed into the foundation of your wisdom. And this is the gift hidden in the darkness. The past that once haunted you becomes the source of your depth, your empathy, your capacity to meet others in their suffering. The wound becomes the place where light enters. The shadow, once integrated, becomes your power. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is the path we have traced. This is the journey from unconscious repetition to conscious integration. This is how the past living inside you transforms from prison to portal. And now, as we prepare to return from the descent, as we stand in the light after having traveled through the darkness, one final question remains. a question that points toward the future of consciousness, toward the next evolution of what it means to be human. If the past lives inside us, and if we can learn to integrate it, what does that mean for the future? What becomes possible when enough individuals do this work? What kind of world can we create when the collective shadow is brought into consciousness? This is the question we carry as we ascend. This is the seed of the next transformation. The past is inside you, but you are not trapped there. You are the one who can bring consciousness to the unconscious, light to the shadow, integration to the fragmented. You are the one the past has been waiting for. We have traveled far, from the hidden mechanisms of memory to the depths of trauma, from the individual psyche to the collective unconscious, from neuroscience to ancient wisdom. We have descended into the basement of the self and witnessed what lives there, the unprocessed past, the inherited wounds, the shadow material that shapes us from the darkness. And we have discovered something profound. The past does not live inside you as a curse. It lives inside you as a catalyst, for consciousness, for transformation, for the evolution of what it means to be human. Every symptom you carry is a message waiting to be decoded. Every repetitive pattern is an invitation to deeper awareness. Every shadow element is a gift wrapped in darkness, waiting for the light of consciousness to reveal its true form. The past is not your enemy. It is your teacher, fierce, demanding, unrelenting, but a teacher nonetheless. But here is what we must understand. This work is not optional. It is not a luxury for those with time and resources. It is the fundamental task of being human. Because if the past remains unconscious, if the shadow remains in exile, if the trauma remains unmetabolized, it does not disappear. It perpetuates, it transmits, it shapes the future through the distorting lens of the unresolved past. Your children, whether biological or metaphorical, will inherit what you do not integrate. Your relationships will replay the patterns you do not make conscious. Your culture will repeat the atrocities it does not acknowledge. The past, unexamined, becomes destiny. But the past, integrated, becomes wisdom. This is the choice before us, individually and collectively. Will we turn toward the shadow, or will we continue to run? Will we do the hard work of integration, or will we settle for the comfortable numbness of denial? Will we break the cycle, or will we pass it forward? The answer is not predetermined. The future is not written. In the gap between stimulus and response, in the space created by consciousness, lies human freedom. And that freedom is real. But it must be earned through the difficult work of self-awareness. We stand now at a threshold in human history. We have technologies that can peer into the living brain, that can map the neural correlates of consciousness, that can even alter gene expression. We have psychological techniques refined over more than a century of depth work. We have spiritual practices preserved through millennia. And we are beginning, finally, to integrate these different streams of knowledge into a comprehensive understanding of how the past lives inside us and how we can transform that inheritance. But knowledge alone is not enough. Tools alone are not enough. What is needed is courage. The courage to descend into your own depths. The courage to face what you have been avoiding. The courage to feel what you have been numbing. The courage to remember what you have been forgetting. The courage to become whole. This is the hero's journey, not as metaphor but as psychological reality. You must leave the familiar world of ego consciousness, descend into the underworld of the unconscious, face the dragon of your repressed material, win the treasure of integration, and return transformed. This is not mythology. This is the structure of human development. This is how we grow. And when you return, when you bring the treasure back from the depths, you do not return for yourself alone. You return for all those who are still trapped in the cycle, still unconsciously repeating their trauma, still haunted by ghosts they cannot name. Your integration becomes a gift to the collective. Your healing creates possibility for others. Your consciousness contributes to the evolution of human consciousness itself. This is not grandiose. This is literal. We are interconnected psychologically and biologically. The work you do on yourself ripples outward. The patterns you break in your life weaken those same patterns in the collective. The shadow you integrate in yourself makes it slightly easier for others to face their shadows. We are not separate. We are part of a vast network of consciousness learning, slowly, how to integrate its own darkness. And this is the ultimate meaning of the past living inside you. It is not just your past. It is the human past. Your personal unconscious opens into the collective unconscious, and your individual healing participates in collective healing. When you do this work, you are not just freeing yourself, you are freeing your ancestors, your descendants, and all those who share in the human condition. So the question is not whether the past lives inside you. It does. That is simply a fact. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Will you allow the past to remain unconscious, running you like a program you did not write? Or will you bring consciousness to it, integrate it, transform it into the foundation of your wisdom and power? The choice, as always, is yours. But the stakes have never been higher. We are living through a time of collective crisis, ecological, political, psychological. The old structures are crumbling. The old stories are failing. And we are being called, each of us, to do the deep work of integration so that something new can emerge. The past is inside you, but so is the future. In the crucible of your consciousness, the lead of trauma can become the gold of wisdom. The wound can become the doorway. The shadow can become the light. This is the promise hidden in the darkness. This is the gift waiting in the depths. This is the revelation that awaits those brave enough to descend. You are not your past, but your past has shaped you. And now you have the opportunity to reshape your past, to change your relationship to it, to integrate what has been split off, to become whole. This is the work of a lifetime. This is the adventure of consciousness. This is how you become fully human. So do not run from your shadow. Do not deny your pain. Do not pretend the past is past. Turn toward it. Descend into it. Bring consciousness to what has been unconscious. Light to what has been dark. Integration to what has been fragmented. The past is inside you, not as curse but as catalyst, not as prison but as portal, not as doom but as opportunity. And the door is open. The descent is available. The transformation is possible. All that is required is your willingness, your courage, your consciousness. Will you descend? The shadow is waiting. The past is calling. The future is watching. And you are the one who can bring them into harmony. You are the alchemist, the transformer, the integrator. You are the one the past has been waiting for. Go now. Into your depths, into your darkness, into the house you have lived in all your life but have never truly explored. Go and discover what lives inside you. Go and integrate what has been split off. Go and become whole. The journey begins with a single step into the unknown, a single breath of courage, a single moment of turning toward what you have been avoiding. That moment is now. The past is inside you, waiting, whispering, ready to be transformed. What will you do with this knowledge? The answer lives inside you, in the place where past and future meet, in the eternal now of consciousness, in the space between who you have been and who you are becoming. Listen. Can you hear it? That voice in the depths? That is not the voice of trauma. That is the voice of your wholeness calling you home. The descent awaits, the integration beckons, the transformation is possible, and it begins always with this: the willingness to see what has been invisible, to feel what has been unfelt, to remember what has been forgotten. The past lives inside you. Now go and live with it consciously. Go and transform it. Go and become free. This is how the cycle breaks. This is how healing happens. This is how consciousness evolves, one person at a time, one moment at a time, one descent at a time, and you, yes, you, are that person. This, yes, this is that moment. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the doorway to your deepest self, your truest power, your fullest humanity. Walk through it. Thank you for listening. If this journey resonated with you, share it with someone who is ready to face their shadow. Subscribe to Echoes of the Ancients for more explorations of consciousness, psychology, and the hidden dimensions of the human mind. The descent continues.